And if you are doing this lifestyle also for many months, many years, then, you can only see so many temples before you're like, what am I actually doing?
How to live a life in which you're chasing something as opposed to running from something.
I was like, okay, well, what does it feel like to just go the opposite direction? Instead of taking 10 shots of whiskey, what if I just stayed sober? How did that feel? Yeah.
How would you quantify, how would you define having a deep connection as just opposed to somebody you know?
Let me tell you a fun fact about our podcast. We're at the beginning process and you can have a tremendous influence over our channel. By just liking and subscribing to our channel, you'll help us increase the quality of the videos that we're creating. Also, you'll stay in the loop with the new videos which are coming every week. Thank you and enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Infinido podcast. I'm really happy to have Geleen with us today. She's an entrepreneur, world traveler, and she's very focused on creating communities around the world. And something that I've been meaning to talk to you about, something very, very interesting to me, is the idea of traveling to escape and how to turn that around. I've started personally in a similar manner, and I didn't realize a thing until I met few fellow nomads, and I just realized that it's not necessarily at the beginning the idea that you want to go somewhere, but you want to leave a place, and that's the primary motivation. But unfortunately, I realized at some point that can become a lifestyle. And then every time when you go to a place and something doesn't just work out as you want to move to a new place to escape. And talk to me a bit about how to overcome that part and how to manage to live a life in which you're chasing something as opposed to running from something.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. Travel Not to Escape is really my passion right now, especially with the podcast that I host with the same name, because I also ran into a lot of nomads doing the same thing, because I was doing the same thing as well. And so once that light bulb clicks in your mind, you start to question, you start to be self-aware when that comes up within yourself and then with other people. So it really comes back to starting with yourself and really understanding, like, where are you at right now? How are you feeling? What areas of your life are you good with? Are you not good with? And just do like a little bit of assessment. I think that we get so caught up in life, especially when we're traveling and doing so many things, that we may not check in with ourselves enough to ask, like, okay, are we still feeling good? And how do we feel about, what we're doing and where we're living and all of that? And understanding, when you are choosing your next destination, are you going to be choosing a destination because of, like, actually what is the reason? So ask yourself that. Is it because you heard someone say it, and like, what is it that you want to get out of that experience? And sometimes it is like you're like, oh, I just want to see a cool thing there, and you're there for a little bit of time. But we as nomads tend to spend a little bit longer in a place. And if you are doing this lifestyle also for many months, many years, then, you can only see so many temples before you're like, what am I actually doing? Like, okay, so it's grounding it back down into you and what matters to you and what your values are, and making sure that the life that you're living is not just a full-time vacation, that you are working towards building something that you feel wholly is within your purpose, and you feel authentic doing it, and you're not just consistently chasing that next temple or site or whatever it is, and that you're building something that makes you feel good along the way.
Absolutely, that's super great. And another thing that I've noticed as well is also the mention of community, because as you mentioned, you as a nomad, you spend more time into location as opposed to being a
Hmm.
tourist, and you start making friends and they start building relationships there. And one thing that I used to do, at least at the beginning of my journey, is that I always felt like people are counting my sins. They're counting how many stupid things I've done. And then all of a sudden they're gonna have enough of me, and then they're just gonna push me out to that community. And I always kind of, at the time when I was counting myself, like, I've done enough stupid things, now it's time to walk away from here. And one of the things that I've learned is to forgive myself and to work with myself and to you know make peace with myself that I am who I am, and sometimes going to make mistakes, and sometimes have to work with people even though I've done something stupid.
What stupid things are you doing?
It's not that. I used to have a period in my life. One thing about having a balanced lifestyle, it's that as a digital nomad, it's pretty difficult to do so. So I had a period of time when I was drinking quite a bit because I couldn't have that balance, and there was not an element to it. So I was going out and I was doing stupid things, and then I'd come back home and feel remorse, and I was like, oh my god, I'm just
Oh
here.
no.
And especially in small communities, like if you're in London or like a really big city, that's pretty forgettable because nobody's gonna remember you. There are so many people. But if you're in a small village and then everybody knows everybody, eventually, it's like everybody's gonna know what you've done last night. And there's also dimension, and I've noticed to myself that I was also running for place because I want to keep this chaotic behavior and didn't want to change it. So you go
Mm,
to a new place, and then you have this clean slate to some degree, and can stop doing the
yeah.
same bad things to a degree. So for me, what happens very much is to learn to forgive myself, but also to be more careful about my behavior, to not just be wild, because I think it's a dimension. If you're starting, you're gonna have the touristic mindset to a degree at the beginning, right? Just you're a new place, be wild, do whatever, and then you realize that's your new home.
Hmm.
So tell me about.
Yeah. So
Sorry, go on.
with that situation, I would ask why it is that you would lean into that quote unquote like wild feeling. Like, what do you get out of being wild or drinking or leaning into that experience in every situation? And that will help you get to the root of like why you feel like you have to show up in that specific way. Is it benefiting you? Or is it taking away from you to where you feel like you have to start over a new place, and that way you can consistently be chaotic? But like, what is that chaotic energy? Like, what's the root of that? And I think by understanding the root of that chaotic energy, you stop having to go to travel to escape from whatever things that you bridges that you burned in the past place, and really address it. So actually, like, talking about drinking and traveling and making connections, I actually made an intentional decision 2 years ago to stop drinking. And this was because I too wanted to test. I've been using myself as a guinea pig throughout these 4 years of traveling, because I wanted to see like, what are the methods for making meaningful connections. And I love alcohol and like the taste of it in general, but I found myself actually leaning into alcohol a lot, especially when I was feeling rather insecure or just like not feeling comfortable with my body or with my social anxiety or any of those things. And so I was like, okay, well, what does it feel like to just go the opposite direction? Instead of taking 10 shots of whiskey, what if I just stayed sober? How did that feel? Would I still make friends? Would I make deeper friends? So starting to ask myself these questions of like why it is that I would drink. And yeah, so now it's been close to 2 years, and I feel like my connections are deeper, especially with myself. I no longer have those blocks, and I feel a lot more confident in all the situations that I used to lean on alcohol for. I think we all lean on a lot of things to make ourselves feel more comfortable in some of these more high stress moments. But yeah, again, it's asking yourself the question of like, what does it look like if you took that away, and what is it that you're using that to numb from?
Absolutely, and that's very interesting. And I want to just talk to you a bit more about sobriety and about your journey. How did that happen? Like it's a big contrasting world, and also when you're traveling, you meet a lot of people who they have a culture of drinking, and it's so socially
Hmm.
acceptable that it becomes a cool habit. It becomes like you're cool if you're drunk, and then that's the thing that it is.
Hmm.
So how did you manage to shift that mindset? It's like I'm just going to stay sober.
Yeah, so I actually started. So I was like a couple years ago in Brazil, and I had the best time in Rio. I had so many caipirinhas and was drunk for the whole time I was there. And then I got to Medellin in Colombia, and I was trying to do the nightlife thing there as well, and I felt a different energy, and I felt like, I don't know, there was a confidence thing that I was lacking when I got to Colombia, where I just didn't feel. The other thing too is Brazil is so body positive, like very body, but everyone just like owns like they're just being themselves in whatever shape or form, right? And so to go from Brazil where everything was just so like free and like vibrant. And then there's just an energy shift I couldn't identify in Medellin, but I felt myself like maybe the comparison between the two countries. And I was like, oh, I don't feel so great. And I had a choice. I remember this rooftop that I went with my friend. I was like, I have a choice. I could feel better by drinking in this moment, or I could lean into like, why is it that I don't feel so great right now, and like really dig into that moment. And so I made a choice to just be sober for the few weeks I was in Medellin. And I ended up going to like a silence yoga ashram for a few days and really leaning into it, where we did like a at the end, when you're in silence, where you can't talk to anyone, you can't play music, any of that. um you really have to be kind to yourself, because that's the only way that you're going to survive that period of time. And I found myself, I remember I was late for the first event that we had to do during this retreat, and I was late and I missed it and they closed the doors on me. And I was so angry with myself. I'm like, oh my God, it's the first thing and I paid for it. And it's like, now I'm gonna sit by myself in this cabin while everyone else is doing whatever activity it was. And I remember being angry with myself for like an hour. And then I was like, whoa, do I really want to sit in this for 3 days? Or do I want to be kind to myself and accept the fact that, yeah, I was late by 3 minutes, and is that going to ruin the next few days for me, or do I be kind and keep moving forward? And so that's what I chose. And then at the very end of this experience, I remember I was a lot more thoughtful. I was a lot more mindful in the actions that I had, like by even like eating. You had to really sit and look at the textures and the colors of what you were eating and really appreciate every moment. And I remember there was an ecstatic dance portion. I'd never done ecstatic dance at this point, which dancing is one of those big social anxiety moments. And I remember that was me at that club a few weeks prior, not feeling so confident to dance. Of course, you're in Medellin, everyone's like dancing. You're like, I just need a little bit something. That was one of the triggers. So then I'm here in Colombia in Silent Street, and we're not talking, but we're just all like dancing in like really weird ways, right? Like acting like animals, and like, oh, act like a giraffe, act like a lion. It's just it was like yeah. Yeah, things like you would want some type of liquid courage to do, but we did it all sober and everyone was in the same position, also feeling a bit awkward, but at the end it just came together so beautifully, where you could just feel there's just like the freedom in our bodies, like being in your body, like that true like embodiment of like, I am in my body, I'm moving my body. And like those thoughts of like, what will other people think, all of those things, like they weren't present there. And I got to taste what that would feel like to be able to move my body just to the beat of the music, because I felt like doing it and not having those like thoughts of like, oh, everyone else is staring at you kind of thing. So that was really a breaking point for me. And I think once I learned how to be comfortable in my body, that was such an unlocking, it unlocked so many things for me. So then I figured, I was like, okay, well, if I no longer need alcohol to dance, and I was already at a point where I like didn't necessarily need alcohol to make conversation, then I was like, oh, well, then what do I need alcohol for? So then I kept going, and yeah, now we're a couple years in multiple countries, meeting a lot of people. I've gone to weddings sober, concerts sober, raves sober, like, and I realized it's all about the energy that you bring. And my energy, like, I've gotten it to the point where people think I'm drunk because I'm like in it, I'm dancing, and I'm the one like getting everyone up on the dance floor, whereas everyone takes like 2 hours for the alcohol to hit them. Where I'm like, no, I'm here. We're dancing for the first I'm the only one dancing on the dance floor for the first 2 hours until everyone finally feels a little bit more comfortable. So I think, yeah, it's such a mindset shift, but it's like one thing at a time, and it's not like oh, immediately it's gonna be great. Like going to a wedding sober was a little terrifying, but you start to do it one at a time, and next thing you know, you're just comfortable in all the situations.
Absolutely, that's a fantastic story, and I can tell you from my experience because I've also been sober for about 1.5 years now. It's been a
Oh, nice.
while.
Congrats.
Thank you. And I was thinking about my journey as well. It's like you mentioned something about the environment. You have to be in the right environment that kind of pushes you towards that. And I think that's a
Yeah.
great thing. So in my case, all my friends were drinking at the time, and then I met a guy who's really cool. He's a skydiver, a fighter, and then he's traveling around the world, and it's really cool. And he's sober for 10 years, right? So we get along really
Mm.
well because we have a lot of things in common. But I always consider, in my perception at the time, that if you're sober, yeah, like one of those has been people like a retiree, and then you talk about the glory days as they are behind you. It's like, oh, back in the day it used to be fun. Now I'm just like a
Mhm.
well-wise person, and I'm not
Yeah.
having fun, but not having fun anymore. And I met this guy. It's like, oh, you can actually be a cool person without drinking. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then I kind of like this idea kind of got embedded into my mind. Like, oh, it's not. You don't necessarily have to drink to be cool. There's other way
Yeah.
around. And that kind of shifted my mindset completely. And then I decided to start my own business shortly after. And I knew that I will be the most productive version of myself if I'm sober completely.
Yeah. Also that, yeah.
And then I decided if I need to give it 100%, 100% it, I'm going to be sober. So I decided I'm going to have my first beer after I get my first clients. And there's the irony
Yeah.
of the universe. What happens is that the first client that I signed was the guy who's running rehabilitation programs in Thailand. And one of the reasons for which he wanted to work with me is because I told him I'm also sober. And I was like,
Wow.
maybe the universe is trying to tell me something. And I was supposed to have in the first beer, then I'll just keep going. And then is initially just I'm gonna be sober for a couple of weeks until I kind of get myself running, and then I start loving this sensation. And as mentioned as well, you kind of get that you don't depend of some external impulse to feel good about yourself. You're
Mhm.
just there, you have that energy, and then you kind of pull people with you as well. And something very
Yeah.
interesting that I noticed is that instead of having a group of friends that would pull me back into my habits, exactly the opposite happens. And some of my friends stopped drinking as well, and most of the people don't drink anymore when they're around me. And I was like, oh,
Mhm.
that's really interesting. It's really, really good to have this kind of people around.
Yeah, and you give other people the freedom to also not feel like they have to drink in order to have fun because they see you doing it and they're like, "Oh, okay, I could also just drink a mocktail." I've converted a lot of people into mocktails as well over the course of the last couple of years because they're like, "Oh yeah, actually, I don't want to feel like crap tomorrow morning, and if we don't need to drink, then yeah, let's do something else. Let's do an activity when we hang out or like run an errand together." And like connections can happen in so many different ways besides just going out and drinking.
Absolutely. And I think also that the quality of the connection I'm start having is greater because when you're drinking, you can't talk to everybody, you don't really filter anybody, and then you
Hmm.
just kind of hang out with everybody. But when you're sober, you kind of pay more attention on connections. That's another
Yeah.
thing that I want to talk to you. Like, how do you mentioned something about connection before in the sense that it's very important to have deep connection as opposed to just like acquaintances.
Yeah.
How would you quantify, how would you define having a deep connection as just opposed to somebody you know?
Yeah, I think about it as someone who sees you and you see them, sees and understands you, and like people that you can feel like your most authentic self around. And there's no masks. And that's what I mean about seeing you. Like you don't have to wear a mask around that person and them as well. And there's that really beautiful that thing that happens with deep connections where you're like, oh, like you feel it in your heart where you're like, yeah, like I feel good in this conversation. And that's not to say deep connections have to be forever. It honestly could just be very small moments in time where you guys are in your lives, but it could be impactful and deep for what it was. And I think that that's the beautiful part of it. Like connections can come and go, but they can be that impactful thing in your life regardless.
But that also will require to have a number of things in common because in order to be able to understand somebody, you kind of have to have a degree of commonalities between you so they can understand better who you are. And I presume that, from my experience at least, my connections are more or less digital nomads, just because they kind of
Mhm.
understand better my lifestyle. But how would you say that if you go to a new place, how do you build connection with people who are local, who don't have your experience, you don't have your view of the world? How do you bridge that gap personally?
Yeah, and I don't know if I necessarily agree that like they have to have everything in alignment or in common in order to be able to be a deep connection. I think that as long as the other person is willing to see your point of view and is curious and open-minded, that you can also have a deep connection because the beauty in connections is that it can also give you different perspectives in life. And that's one of the reasons why I think like, the five closest people around you impacts you greatly. But that like the difference between digital nomads and people that living at in like a more stable environment. I feel like as digital nomads, we see a lot more, we meet a lot more people that are doing so many different things. And so, yeah, maybe we have the lifestyle part in common, but there's just so many different aspects of our lives that don't align. Um, So you will find commonality, even if it's just a different thread that you might not realize. There's always a thread that connects all of us. It might not be the digital nomad lifestyle. So that's with locals, we have different lifestyles in terms of travel, but we probably have similar things that light us up. And that's actually one of the things I ask a lot of people is like understanding what lights them up and connecting through that avenue. So, for example, in Vietnam, I'm in Da Nang, Vietnam right now, and I have made some local friends. And the local friends that I've made, they are not digital nomads, but we're both excited about business. So I've made some local friends who we have that more like entrepreneurial connection going on, and we support each other in those ways. And then other friends who, so when I say light you up and understanding what lights you up, so play is my belief is the foundation for connecting with yourself more authentically, but also being able to connect with others more deeply. And in order to understand what lights you up, especially as an adult, where we've already kind of lost touch with some of these things, I ask people what their what childhood activity they used to enjoy when they were a kid. And by understanding and going back to that, you think of like the moments when you were younger that made you happy that you did without any preconceived notions. You did it because it felt good. You did it because it made you laugh or you just enjoyed it in some way, shape, or form. So, for example, if you remember fondly, and again, the memories might not come flooding in. Like I've asked this question with a lot of people. They're like, oh, I don't know. I didn't really have a great childhood. Or like I had a lot of things where I like spent a lot of time doing X, Y, Z. And I was like, okay, sit and think about it. It might not necessarily be an activity you did a lot. So, for example, I remember I asked a woman this recently, and she didn't have a clear answer. And then, as we were kind of walking through some things, she remembered she had a lot of stuffed animals, and that she would actually have her bed lined with stuffed animals, and they would have different names, different stories behind them. And she remembered fondly having this collection. And I told her, I was like, okay, well, there are 8 play personalities based off of play research from Dr. Stuart Brown, his book on play. And I love that book. And in that book as well, so with the play personalities, with what she was doing with the stuffed animals, it was imaginative play, which leads into storytelling. And so her play personality is storytelling. And so I asked her, I was like, okay, in what ways are you leaning into storytelling as an adult? Like, are you reading books? Are you going to plays and movies and going to like writing clubs? Or, like in what ways are you leaning into that thing that used to light you up when you were a child? And she wasn't. And so as an adult, I always tell people, okay, like start with that. Like you can have different play personalities as an adult. Of course, you can try a lot of different things, but for people who don't know where to start, I love this question because they can start to dip their toe in a specific activity. And especially as you're traveling, one, by doing these activities, you're lighting yourself up, right? You're like, oh, okay, I like doing this because I'm doing it. And I could meet some people along the way, but like either way, like I feel good doing this activity. And then what happens is then you meet people, and this is the common thread that you have. So whether they're a digital nomad or a local, you could be meeting them at the event. Maybe they're hosting the event, and then you get in contact with them that way. Or you meet someone at a random meetup, and you invite them and say, hey, there's this like book club that I'm a part of. And if you want, you can come and join. And so now your connection point is more solid. And then you form the more repeated connection contacts after that one event, of course, but you have like that follow-up event to connect with them on. So that's always like the way that I like to go about it is, there's so many different ways that you can connect with people, but like, why not start with something so fundamental to us all?
Absolutely. And that's a really beautiful explanation. And I want to highlight a few points that you mentioned on the way. One thing is that the importance of being open-minded. And I think that's
Mhm.
it's every single one of us like to think ourselves as being open-minded people, but it's sometimes it's kind of difficult to accept that we're not always open-minded. And
Yeah.
then sometimes, I was talking very recently to a friend and she gave me a feedback or something. And I realized that my first reaction is to be defensive as opposed to just kind of try
Mm,
to understand that point. And she highlighted that, listen, the first thing you're defensive, like, huh, interesting. I've noticed that myself after she pointed out. I was like, I always thought of myself as a very open-minded person. When I receive a new idea, the first thing I'm defensive on it. And I think that it's really important to be open-minded. I think also that being open-minded, it's a ongoing process that you have to
yeah.
kind of put yourself into, like, oh, the first thing that my first reaction is to be negative toward it or to reject this idea, like, oh, maybe I should just try to understand it first. And I think that's
Mhm,
really, really important towards connecting with people, as you mentioned as well. It's like, I'll be open-minded. It doesn't have to, and something that you mentioned kind of struck me in the sense that you don't necessarily have to have too many communal things with the person to be able to build a connection. You can just be open-minded and be curious, and you can learn a lot of
mhm,
things. And that's a big mistake I made through my first part of life, is that I was always very narrow. Like, I want this kind of people, know this kind of people, so I'm just gonna have my
mhm,
group of narrow people. And then now I'm trying as much as possible to expand that reach. And so it's like, maybe I hang out with people that engage in activities that I wouldn't normally do, just kind of explore myself. And I feel like before you try a new activity, you don't really know how that is. You kind of think like, oh, I would like it or not like it. But it's very important to
mhm.
work with yourself, because it's actually very little that we know about one ourselves, because we don't have that experience. And I think that it's really great to expose ourselves to various activities. And you mentioned as well play. That's something really, really interesting. And I found it to be a lot more useful to meet people in playful activities as opposed to social events. It's,
Yes.
at least personally. So if I go for a hike, I would have more meaningful conversation as opposed to going to a meetup or a local, like a social event.
Mhm,
And I suspect that because you're there for and making friends, it's an alternative goals. Your goal is to kind of enjoy the environment, to go there for the activities in itself, and then you already have fun from beginning. You're already there
yes.
engaged, and that's so important. You basically are there with a glass of happiness full, and then you meet other
Mhm.
people in the same manner as opposed to just sitting there awkwardly in a social events. Maybe you're just shy and you don't know what to do because you don't know how to engage people that much, and then you feel a bit insecure. So I think it's absolutely great for people to play and engage in activities as part of a social environment.
Yeah, it's less pressure. One, you're not there. You're like, oh, must make friends, otherwise I'm a failure. It's like, no, I'm gonna go to hike. And I always think about events in this way as well. Of I am there because I want to be there, regardless of whether I meet people. If I meet people, it's a bonus. But like me going to this is because I want to have that experience, whether it's going to that rooftop that that place is like located in, or I wanted to do that hike anyway because I genuinely like hikes. But always go for yourself. And by detaching the expectations and the pressure from that situation, you actually end up attracting so many more people to you, because, as you said, you're like already happy and bubbly. Who doesn't want to talk to a person who's already smiling when they walk in the room versus someone who's like looking around a little bit more timid, a little bit more insecure? And it's just kind of like it's a different energy, and energy is very contagious. So, yeah, activities are a great way, especially if you feel some anxiety with social activities. It's a great way to just focus on you and the fact that like you want to do that activity regardless of whether or not you meet anyone.
Absolutely. And I can give you a quick story that happened to me. And I'm very much into chess. I like to play chess and I like to bring people together. And I was in Denmark in Aarhus, and I entered a board game store, and they had like really cool chess sets. They have the one with figurines, and they have like Harry Potter, they have Mario Bros, they have like Lord of the Rings. And I started talking there with somebody because of that. And I didn't even intend to make any friends. I was just super excited about those amazing chess sets. And I spent there a bunch of times, and I talked to the cashier, and we end up being friends because of that. But like, I didn't go there inside with the mindset I'm gonna make some friends here, but just I was super excited, and I could barely hold my smile back because I was like, always smile. This is something truly amazing. And then, when people see that you're glowing in positive energy, they just want to be around you because you have that kind of energy, a very magnetic state of being, which is really attractive.
Yeah, it's the impact that you have on other people. And if they, when they're around you, they feel like good about themselves and it's just like a very light, fun feeling. Like, yeah, they're going to want to introduce themselves, have a conversation, connect even further, and also like introduce you to their community as well, right? Like if you meet someone, you're like, oh, they're like good people, like I want like my friends to also meet them, and that's like the best way to start to integrate into an existing community as well. I think that's also an issue a lot of people have. They're like, oh, I can't seem to break into like the established friends groups and communities within a city. It's like if you come in and you feel, and it's like a very like open energy, and you're like, yeah, I'm excited, like people will want to integrate you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then just give me an example from yourself. Let's just say, for the sake of this example, you are in a completely new city, you don't know anybody there, and you want to start connecting with people. How would you approach that process?
Yeah. So I actually do this a lot because
Okay.
um because there's so many cities now, like at this point 4 years later, there's so many cities in the world that I go to that like I know someone, or I know a friend of a friend, right? So if I post that I'm gonna go to a city, like I will probably have friends before I even get to that city, which is a beautiful thing. And I love that that's a thing now. So what I've actually been doing intentionally is for the first 2 weeks, I don't tell anyone I'm in a city. And I like I like to test myself. I'm like, can I make friends in 2 weeks? And so I've been doing that over the last 4 years of like, what are the things that I can do in each city? And I've been creating, it's kind of nerdy, but I've been creating strategies based off of me testing myself in these cities of like, okay, in 2 weeks, if I try not drinking, how can I make friends? If I try only trying to make friends with locals, what do I do? If I try only doing things from online, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So um, what I did, I give Da Nang for an example. So came here. Oh, actually, I won't give Da Nang as an example because I did know someone when I got here. But I will give Manila as an example of a place that was very difficult for me to make friends, and this was recently. I went for the first time last July, and I did not know a single soul in the city. And I had landed, and I also didn't do too much research. So typically, what I would like to do is introduce myself via Facebook group, and I'm very intentional about like how to find these Facebook groups. So actually, I did this in Manila. So initially, when I went a month prior, I did my usual to-dos. And what I did was I found Facebook groups for digital nomads and for expats. There weren't really that many in the Philippines, but I introduced myself anyway to a few groups. And my introduction is very specific. So I give them a little context of who I am and where I've been recently, and then very specific ways to play. So like, tell me ways that you can, or salsa communities, or like specific sports or groups or whatever that I was looking for. I put that into my intro, and then a way to connect with me, like via Instagram, for example. And I had gotten some good, useful tips from people, but what I noticed in those groups was there weren't that many digital nomads that were active. And then two, the expats even were much older. It was more of a retirement community, ex-military retirees, or just like local Filipinos, but like a different demographic, like not, not what we're used to. And so it was actually very difficult for me by the time I landed, because these normal traditional ways that I would utilize in order to connect with people were not working for this group in Manila. Um, so I tried different strategies. And so the other thing that I did was really lean into play. So I'm like, okay, I'm not finding the groups or the events that are happening. So let me go and find the activities that I want to do. So I found salsa classes in a salsa community. I found a meditation center and yoga that offered yoga as well. And then I found art classes that were hosted by local community centers as well. So those were like 3 different play personalities. I was like, I'm going to lean into this. And I actually made some friends with locals doing those 3 activities. The salsa community was a really great one for me. Doing art classes, doing the meditation twice a week also was really great. And I met some people through that. And then the other method that I tested out there was I created my own meetups because I couldn't find any of the ones I was looking for. So then I saw that there was a local salsa event that was happening at one of the restaurants that I really liked. And I went on Bumble BFF. So I did kind of looked at different resources online that I could take advantage of. And so Bumble BFF was one. Very strategic in using that. And I put people who like salsa that were new to town because they were more likely to show up and be less flaky. And people who like to travel, of course. Those were my three filters. And then I invited all the matches to go to a salsa event with me, and I created a WhatsApp group for all of them. And I ended up with like 10, 15 people, and it was a lot of fun. And that ended up being like my group of people that I ended up going out with for like the next couple of months. So if you can't find the community using Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups, or any of those like online methods, I tried Internations as well, and it was also an older crowd. You can lean into community events, or you can build your own. So those are some methods.
Absolutely. That's a really great analogy. Another thing that I want to highlight is the fact that it takes a strategy as well. You can't just like be charismatic, walk into a club, already make friends. That could work as
Yeah.
well, but in order to be able to kind of meet people that you really truly connect, you have to have a degree of strategy, and then you have to look for specific stuff. Because people who are maybe a bit more shy, I'm thinking, or like more towards like
Mhm.
introverted, they will think that, I'm not charismatic enough, therefore I'm not gonna make friends. But like if you have a strategy in place and you go to a place you're gonna enjoy anyway, but you have to think about it ahead. You have to have a bit of a plan. You don't have to overthink it, but like you have to have a bit of a plan in order to be
Mhm.
able to reach the right people that you're going to create really easily. And I think it's an extreme example of what I usually do when I move to a new place. I go to the local job zone. Job zone is the skydiving center, and almost every area I've been to, they have a skydiving center. And because I'm a skydiver myself, I get along really well with people there. And then
Oh,
it's really,
nice.
really easily to integrate with them. And we have a lot of things in common because we enjoy extreme sports. And it's really great to connect with people in that regard as well. But that could be anything. I've met people also through volley groups or to, as mentioned
Mhm.
before, hiking, board games. That's a cool thing. If you're into board games, it's a really social environment because you're going to be stuck in front of a table for like a couple of hours, and then eventually
Yeah.
you're going to talk to people.
Yeah, and you're working together in a team. And that's actually, so that's one of the things about making friends with locals is because we're all coming in from different places, with different income sources, compared to locals, there isn't a power dynamic that we do have to be aware of. And in order to remove that particular barrier of a power dynamic, so for example, if like you're trying to be friends with like the housekeeper, there's going to be like some power dynamics involved because yeah, they're like technically employed by you, or the income level is not the same, and so you would have to be aware and adjust what you guys do so it's affordable for them. But in order to break through with that and find locals that you have more of a deep connection with and more in common with, doing an activity that puts you on the same playing field, like board games, is actually a great one. Or connecting with locals that have a similar educational or work or whatever activity background. Say they're also skydive instructors, for example, then that puts a difference playing field that's not just like the differential in the income or status, for example.
Absolutely. And just a quick thing is like something I found very interesting is when I go to new places to shop for clothes locally, just to kind of integrate myself just a bit more from a fashion standpoint.
Mm.
That
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that seems to be very useful.
Yeah, definitely. But like in a lot of places, like you're gonna stick out regardless, right? So it's like
Yeah,
like I'm gonna go. Yeah, it's like I'm gonna stick out for me, like anywhere. So no matter what I'm wearing, yeah, it's like good to kind of adapt what you're wearing, but like they can spot a foreigner.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, for sure. But another thing I want to talk to you about is like, okay, so you go to a new place, great connection, but eventually you're gonna have to leave that place. How do you find the most
Mhm.
useful way to keep in touch with people and then keep that connection going, especially the closest one, because you can't keep in touch with everybody. But if you have somebody who really,
Yeah.
really, truly connects, how do you maintain that level of energy and connection?
Yeah, I think you have to let the connection breathe for a little bit, right? It's so tempting, like as soon as you like one of you leaves the city or the country that you're in, you're like, oh, we're gonna like be best friends forever, and we're gonna, like try to maintain this, and I'll see you all the time. It's like realistically, we got to be real with it, and like our energy levels aren't going to be the same. We're not going to be in the same city and have the convenience factor, and so it's okay. Like you have to realize that chapter of that connection is over and that you're entering a new chapter. And it's beautiful to enter that new chapter. You don't know what's ahead, but you have to lean into it in like a very open-minded and excited way. It's not the end, it's just a beginning of some different level of connection. So let the connection breathe, let you all settle into what the routine is going to be. And then from there, you start to establish, okay, like let's do something like, so for example, I have a friend in Argentina and she and I were both building our businesses. So we're like, ooh, like, and we're both like into spirituality, manifestation, all that stuff. And so we have been supporting each other accountability wise by having like weekly Monday work blocks where we'll like work for a few hours, but like on our own thing and then check in on each other and like have goals lined out. And I've actually done this same format with a lot of friends. And that is one way that I recommend for a lot of people is to really lean into that and support each other, because that's like one of the best things about friendship is that you guys are there cheering each other on in whatever path you end up going on. And maybe you have different goals, but why not hold each other accountable in some way, shape, or form? So I have a lot of meetings, actually, like scheduled Zoom calls with friends. Either it's once a week, once a month, or once a quarter, but I have scheduled things in my calendar with a lot of different friends. And we do different levels of accountability. Some we're doing co-working blocks. For that same friend, I also help her with her finances, and she helps me with like different like ideas on creation. She's a content creator. And then with another friend, like she and I are in very different life paths. Like she's pregnant with her first child right now, whereas I'm like trying to build a business in the other side of the world. But we have like we'll talk, we'll catch up, but we don't fall into the trap of like, oh, we're only going to catch up, right? Because like you also still want to create like new things together, new goals, new memories. So like we'll check in on okay, like what's the thing that we're going to do by the next time we catch up in a month? And it could be something small, it could be something big, but we'll like check in on each other for the next call and keep that going. So there's kind of like a new thing that we're like working towards together that we're both aware of. Other friends I've done classes with or had them join like different masterminds together. So we're like working on a new project together. Again, separate purposes, but like we're doing a new activity virtually together. So even if you're not in the same place, you're still a part of it. So yeah, those are just some methods. And then others I've also met in multiple cities together. So like if we're already on the same side of the world, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, like I can make my way up slowly and fit in like a week or two and we can like co-live together and then I'll leave from there. So it's like being intentional as well about the route that you're taking so that you can spend it with friends. And then the friends back at home in the US, I do these best friend tours. So like I plan my years in quarters, and with each quarter I have a different intention on like what that goal is. So if my intention is to invest in deepening the connections that I have with my existing friends from the US, then that quarter is me visiting them all. And like maybe I'm not doing as much work, but like I'm definitely like connecting more deeply with my best friends. And so I'll spend like a few weeks in each of their places and like rotate over the next few months. And those are always great. It burns me out after a while. But again, that was the intention of that period. So that's just a few different ways that I've connected or reconnected with some of my existing connections.
That's super interesting what you mentioned, and it seems to me like everything that you do, especially with connection, is very much intentional. As much as any people kind of, no, majority of people when they're thinking about friendship, they just think about something that goes organically and just go by itself. Sometimes you have to put a bit of intent there to like, oh, we need to have a good connection, we need to keep in touch, we need to work on things together to make this relationship progressing and also beneficial for the both of us. And it's really interesting that you're very focused on having that intentional, like, okay, cool, then we need to structure some calls, we need to structure some plans together, we need to keep each other accountable, which is really helpful.
Yeah, and Yes, I love the beauty and just like very free. Like it is when you first meet people, it's like, okay, like this just flows. And that's the connection that I have when I'm talking with friends as well. Like the conversation just flows. But in order to keep those lasting connections, there's going to need to be some effort involved. And it doesn't have to be a lot of effort. Like I literally just have recurring calendar invites with a lot of them. And a lot of the times we move it around because life happens. But again, it's like setting yourself up with a system or a structure so that you can continue those connections in a way that feels good for both of you. Because otherwise, you can go years, decades without talking to the same contact. Like there are friends I have in my life where that has happened. And so I try to be, again, intentional with the new connections or the ones that like I know I want to invest a significant amount of energy and time in. And
That's
again,
really
it also depends on the season. So your season of life might be different from another from one of your even best friend's season of life, and you also have to respect that. Like when I was going in like my very woo-woo spiritual phase, my friend who's like New Yorker, tech company, New York, fast pace, we didn't talk for 3 months. Like we went from like talking every single day to like we're just not on the same level right now. And like we were kind of frustrating each other because she was like working on getting promoted and was like very like in it and intense. And I was like, oh, life is great. And we're reviving in Mexico and I'm gonna do this like spiritual healing sound bath. And we just were not going to align during that period. And so I think we let that connection breathe for just a few months. And then we came back around after a few months. We're like, okay, cool. Like I'm a little bit more grounded. You're a little less intense. We're good and still best friends today. But like sometimes we go from like talking every day to like once a month to like once every few months to like 3 times a day again, right? And so it's understanding that your connection is not going to be the same, even with your best friend all the time. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to be friends. It's just it changes depending on the season that you're in.
yeah, something very interesting that I've been thinking about. Also, the fact that if you have very very close friends, sometimes the connection when you're abroad kind of coldens to some degree, or at least it's not as close as you perceive it before. But when you meet again, it's like you're back in and you feel the same energy
Mhm.
with the person that you had before, and which is really really beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah, and that is the nice thing is because fundamentally, like you reach that point where you're like, oh, I can be myself around you and I feel seen. And the other beautiful thing is the connections that you have in the past, they are the ones that know a very specific version of you. So when you see them again, it's like activating that version of yourself. And like sometimes that version of yourself hasn't been seen in a while. So it's really nice, especially now that I'm in like when I'm meeting people now, I'm meeting them as sober Geleen and I'm meeting them as like entrepreneur digital nomad versus the people that like knew me back when I was like more intense corporate consultant that drank every day. You know, it's like they know a very different version of me, but I actually really appreciate that because all of those parts are still within you in some extent.
I could absolutely relate with that because the majority of people I have around me just know me as the sober Octavian, and then now I
Yeah.
sometimes I fly back to London. I have like old friends since we're kids, and they knew me throughout all the stages, and they're telling stories since back in the days, and it's super beautiful to stay together. Usually when I fly into London, the first night we don't sleep because it's kind of catch up
Yeah.
night and stay there, and it's really beautiful to kind of spend with people that know you before you became this version of yourself.
And that really is like it goes back to like loneliness. Like, why do we feel lonely? We feel lonely when we don't feel seen, heard, understood. And, in a lot of ways, it's nice to know that there's all these different connections around the world that see you, different parts of you potentially, but they see you and you exist. And I think that that goes a long way towards that going against that feeling of loneliness.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another thing that I want to ask you, because I lived in the US for a bit, and I noticed that there is a current across the Western civilization is that people perceive that the rest of the world is very dangerous. How do
Yeah.
you how do you perceive that, and what's your take on it?
Oh, I have my own take on this for sure. I have traveled around a lot. I've spent a good chunk of my time in Central and South America, which is definitely red flagged by the US. And I have felt the most unsafe in the US actually. So I think a lot of it is you don't know what you don't know. And if society and media is portraying only a very limited view of a different country, if like, oh, it's only the drugs and the shootings and the terrorist activity that you're seeing and the protests that you're seeing, then yeah, like that's, of course, everyone's going to perceive that very limited view of that country or that city. But there are women living all over the world. There are kids living all over the world, and they're living there, so it's like, okay, like as a solo female traveler, you have to take that into perspective of like, okay, like what do the women and children do when they're in this city? Like they're not just hiding and, not existing. So try to understand, like, I think that the biases are there. But once you're actually on the ground and talking with people and like seeing how they live, and you're like, oh, we're not that different after all. Of course, yes, you have to take your precautions and definitely be aware of your surroundings and not put yourself in situations that could be dangerous, right? Like I'm not walking by myself in a dark alley as soon as I land, right? I take like a month or so to really understand, like, is this a city that I can walk around in at night? And some cities you can't. Like I'm not walking around by myself at night in Mexico City, for example. In Buenos Aires, I wasn't walking around past like midnight once all the things were closing up. And in Da Nang here in Vietnam, I at 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm out there walking the boardwalk. Like I'm totally fine, like at any time of day here. But I didn't do that immediately. So um, I think back to your question, there are safe parts of the world and there are unsafe parts of the world, and that exists regardless of what country you're in. And you have to take your precautions regardless. But I think you also just have to realize that once you break out of that fear, you can experience a lot of beauty as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great deal of perception that people have because the media is representing like one small percentage of whatever happens.
Mhm.
I have a very interesting story to tell. Like, I have a friend from New York, and he told me a story that he, about 2004, he wanted to fly to Argentina and wanted to move there. And all his friends like said, "Don't go there. It's really dangerous. I've heard all these bad things about it." And eventually, he went anyway. And he was talking to people from Argentina and found out to be really, really lovely there. And then people from Argentina asked him like, "Hey, where are you from?" It's like, "I'm from New York." And then they say like, "Oh man, I would never fly to New York in my entire
Yes.
life."
Yes. I've had that same conversation because I was living in Chicago prior to like becoming a digital nomad. So I get that a lot where it's like, oh, you're from Chicago, you live in Chicago. And the people from Argentina are scared. You're like, oh God. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's it.
there are parts, you do as the locals. So like when I was in Argentina, I asked the woman there, like, where do you go, what areas should I avoid? I also ask, especially, at what point should I not be walking around outside or using public transportation? I always have to ask a woman this, because if I asked a man this, they're like, any time of day, 1 a.m, 2 a.m, 3 a.m, use the public transport, whatever, right? Different considerations. You ask a woman this in Chicago, after 9 p.m., do not take public transport, go Uber, because you end up in situations where you're the one woman in the car, in a train filled with men, and that's an uncomfortable situation for us. So ask the locals and ask them like what the normal things are for their safety, and then you'll be able to adapt like they do, right? And like I would say, like Buenos Aires is a great city to live in. I just also follow like what the other women do when they are living and traveling there.
Absolutely. It's very important, as you mentioned, to take precaution and to learn from locals and ask them what to do and take that
Mhm.
on yourself to be able to be safe. It's not anybody, it's not anyone else's responsibility for your safety. It's your own. So it's your own priority to make sure that you're safe. But if you take your own
Yeah.
precaution, I think most places in the world are pretty safe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then like the media makes its money by views.
Obviously.
So it's like, yes, but like, are you going to be like, it's just like the same thing with TikTok and Instagram, right? Like, are you going to
Yeah,
take that hook and that video as like the truth, or are you going to, explore it a little bit more, do some fact checking and then see? And like, there are so many creators out these days that are like giving raw views of places, which is nice, like long YouTube videos of them walking around. I think those are really helpful. handle. Because like I can't actually, like when I look at a Google map and I'm like looking around for like accommodation, it's so hard to like really get a sense of a city and what it looks like and like what it looks and feels like walking around there. I think that's where like a big part of the safety comes in. It's like, oh, do I feel comfortable walking around by myself? But it's beautiful that like there's YouTubers out there that are just filming themselves walking, and they're like, oh, I could actually see and feel, and like, are they getting catcalled? No? Okay, cool. Everyone's smiling and just enjoying and offering them free things. Like, okay, that I can handle. So do your research and like really see what it is like on the ground there.
Absolutely. That's really good. It's a good advice for anybody watching. And also, now in closing, I have two questions which I like to ask to every guest that I have. First one is, what advice would you give to your former self before you start traveling?
Oh, before I start traveling in general or
No,
nomading?
no, nomading. Before you start your journey as a
Oh,
nomad.
oh, okay. I I would tell myself that it's not. Oh, it is. You're not gonna know what you're doing a lot of the time, and that's it's just doing this is not gonna solve anything. You're not gonna know what you're doing. It's not a magic pill, but it's worth it regardless. Like you're gonna learn so many things about yourself, more things than you ever thought you could. You're going to break open all of the things that you have stuffed deep, deep down inside of yourself, all those wounds, all those band-aids that you put on, like all those are getting ripped off. You are going to meet so many more people than you ever thought, and you're going to learn about so many new things and different possibilities in life than you ever knew existed. So is it going to be just like rainbows and butterflies all the time? No, but it's going to be a really worthwhile journey, and you should go because there's so much for you to experience. So I would give that advice to my formal self of like, this isn't a magic pill, but it's a path that you're going to need to go on.
Absolutely. And that's the big difference between knowledge and experience, right? Between knowing something from reading about it and actually living through it and experiencing yourself.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like you are going to be that person regardless of whether or not you get to travel around the world while you are existing. And like actually I would say that by traveling around the world, you are put in so many more situations to have to analyze things and like the self-doubt and like all the scary decisions that you're constantly having to make. Like it's kind of an accelerator for life, because you can't. And yeah, it's a lot of us end up going slow mad and like settling in for a little bit longer in each destination because it is tiring to constantly be making decisions. But by doing these things, by constantly making decisions, by constantly changing your environment, you are accelerating your growth and really leaning into change in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And also, if I could add something, it would be that you're going to trust yourself more when you make decisions.
Mm, yes, 100%.
Okay. And the last question is very similar to this one, but if somebody is new now and they haven't starting the digital nomad journey, but they are thinking about, what would you advise them to do?
Oh, okay. If they have not started their digital nomad journey, I would say start with some foundational things. It's very tempting, and this is what I did, to just give up all your things and move out in a week and then just go. And then fly in the furthest destination you could possibly go. But if you are easing into this lifestyle, I think foundational things is making sure that you have a skill set that you can do remotely and that you feel good about, at least to start with, and really building a sense of stability in your finances so that you can take risks in other areas of your life. So if you are going to go on a healing journey or you're going to try out different hobbies or different like experiences, it's good to have stability in one way. And to be a nomad, like to jump in if you aren't already employed by a corporate like remote job, then that is going to be the most important factor. And then two would be also understanding like what location is going to be good for you to start with, that's going to help you in whatever goals you have to start. So if it is you wanted to meet a lot of people in the lifestyle, I would recommend going to a digital nomad hub so that you can meet a lot of people and learn from them and gain mentors and like get ideas from the people that you're meeting. But if it is you want to have a little bit more time to focus on building your income stream, then maybe somewhere that's a little bit more quiet but has like the stability in the Wi-Fi and the co-working options in order to be able to accomplish that goal. So that would be my advice to them.
That's really great. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today. I was surprised that I learned quite a few things, that I kind of changed my mind about a few things, which is really, really
Oh,
interesting. So
amazing.
it was really great talking to you today, and I hope that we'll catch up soon, and then maybe we can have another episode later on. So yes, thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I can't wait to talk more.